Thank you.
Yeah, we're now live on YouTube, Chair.
Brill, thank you. So we will get underway. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're all well. We've got another interesting session this morning, so we'll crack on as ever with item 1, which is apologies for absence. So have we had any received?
No, I haven't received any apologies for this meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. Understand Councillor O'Hara is having a little difficulty with her internet connection, so hopefully she'll be able to join us as and when she can. So moving on to item 2, we've got declarations of interest. So do any members need to make any declarations?
No.
Shaking of heads and voices, so that's good. Thank you. Item 3 is the minutes from the last meeting. Again, hope everybody's had an opportunity to read through and are happy with the minutes. Can't see anybody dissenting from that. And just quickly, before we move on to the first main item, just say we've got Councillor Lawman joining us this morning, as the topics we're going to be discussing fall into his portfolio area. So we shall move on to item 4, which is the River Eye Strategic Plan, a really interesting document. And I believe Emma Arclay is going to take us through that. You're on mute, I'm afraid.
I am, Chair, yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to quickly set the scene about the Ise Valley Strategic Plan. It's a partnership project, the drafting of which has been led by the River Nen Regional Park with input from partners of the River Ise Partnership. It sets out a very large scale and ambitious programme of actions and projects that will enhance the... Oh, that threw me a little bit. I'll just get rid of the box that's appeared on my screen, that will enhance the quality of the Ise Valley, not just for people, but for wildlife as well. It's important to note this is not just about the natural environment. The plan is equally about bringing forward socio-economic benefits through tourism opportunities, access and connectivity, and also about natural flood management and mitigation, and about mitigating against climate change. The report recommends that members both note and endorse the content of the plan, and I'm asking, or the report is asking, for it to be presented to Executive for approval. That approval will then provide recognition of the plan's worth, which will enable us as officers to use it as a tool to attract funding, and also to develop and deliver projects collaboratively, both with partners and stakeholders, but also with our local communities who are within the Ise catchment. So to give you a little bit of background, the River Ise Partnership came together in October 2019. The partnership includes the Environment Agency, the Forestry Commission, Natural England, the River Nen Regional Park, the Wildlife Trust, Wickstead Park, ourselves, of course. West Northamptonshire Council are just seeking approval from their Planning Policy Committee to become a full member. And we also liaise very closely with Anglian Water and the Boughton Estate. And we have political oversight provided by Councillor Mike Tebbett. The vision of the partnership is really about ensuring that the Ise Valley plays a central role in Northamptonshire's sustainable and economic prosperity. It's about the landscape, it's about the sense of place, and what we really want to do is to ensure that it is as highly regarded and valued as planned growth. And I wonder if you'll excuse me 1 second, Chair. I can hear the dustmen are in the background and it's deafening.
No problem.
All in the timing, isn't it? All in the timing. Despite COVID, the partnership have made some really positive progress since their inception, not just through the production of this plan, but also in terms of project development and securing of funding. One of those projects that I want to tell you about today is about the Ise Valley Way. This is a flagship project that is really seeking to link Wellingborough through Kettering and up to Corby via a continuous walking and cycling route. That route is intended to facilitate commuting as much as it is about leisure and recreation. It's come a long way from the initial desktop mapping exercise that we did back in 2019. We've now properly mapped the whole route. It's been ground truthed. Opportunities have been identified to make it happen. The project officer for the Ise Valley has secured £40,000 from the Community Renewal Fund to commission a feasibility study with interim designs so that we can actually start taking it forward. In addition to that, we've also secured £100,000 from the Garden Communities Fund for the surfacing of land north of Wickstead Park and up to Deeble Road. And we've got a further bid of £200,000 to extend the River Ise footpath and cycle link from Wickstead Park up to Hanwood Park. There's also an appetite to connect this project, the Ise Valley Way, with the Greenway as a starting point really for rolling the Greenway concept out across the whole of North Northants. The Greenway project officer has been working very closely with the Ise Valley project officer, and together they've identified a route to from the regenerated Chester House up to the Wellingborough embankment. And this is really exciting for us because she's also secured £80,000 from the Community Renewal Fund to provide a detailed study for that route. And it means that it'll be the first link between the Greenway and the Ise Valley Way, which is our step forward to rolling it out across North Northamptonshire. One more project that I'd like to share with you that's really taken flight. We call it the South Meadows project, which is located in Wickstead Park. It's a two-phase project. Phase one is extremely ambitious and innovative. It's all about re-engineering the river to restore some natural meandering and to reconnect it with the natural floodplain. Phase two is all about enhancing the study area through habitat creation, improving access and connectivity for people and wildlife from the wider Wickstead Park area down into South Meadows. This for us is a real showcase of innovation. It shows that we can actually right some of the wrongs and the mistakes that we've made in the past with messing around with the river. We intend to fully capitalise on this project through education from school children to university students and also with members of the public and local community. Funding has already been secured for phase one to deliver it, £50,000 from the Environment Agency and £40,000 from the Rivernen Regional Park, both of whom are members of the partnership. I wanted to share these projects with you because they demonstrate that the partnership is properly serious about realising its vision, and it's already using the Ise Valley Strategic Plan to guide its progress. The plan itself provides a very effective strategy just to sort of bring together people and projects and funding to make things happen. In terms of the structure of the plan, it's set within a study area which really reflects the catchment of the River Ise and spurs up to Corby. The study area has been divided into 3 zones, which have then been closely profiled to establish a baseline essentially. And the baseline looks at issues and opportunities associated with biodiversity, connectivity and access, community health and well-being, landscape, heritage, flooding, and water management and ecosystem services. So we've really looked at every little detail we can to make enhancements as we're going along. And then the real push of the plan is part 3, which sets out implementation, and we've divided it into 3 sections. So we're looking at how we're going to develop working practices between the partners and between local communities and between voluntary organisations. Also through the introduction of general project principles. Projects ought to have all of these certain things happening. and also through the identification of individual projects, which will be kind of like a living plan, because as we deliver them, they'll fall off and we'll get new ones coming on board. In terms of connections with other plans and programmes, the plan will help us meet our obligations arising from the Environment Act 2021 and the government's 25-year environment plan. It's going to contribute to meeting the council's commitments in the corporate plan, particularly in relation to the active and fulfilled lives, safe and thriving places, and of course, green and sustainable environment for North Northants. Projects will be informed by using the council's habitat opportunity mapping, and this evidence-based approach means that we'll have much greater influence to secure funding when we put in applications. It will also link in with the natural capital investment plan that we'll be developing, which sets out the priority and pipeline projects and informs the development of the strategic plan. And we will be able to use the Eyes Valley plan to inform the development of the local nature strategy, which is a duty conferred upon us by the Environment Act, as well as the nature recovery network, which we also need to identify. Resources, the plan's been funded in partnership. The plan's been funded in partnership through the former borough councils of Welling Borough and Kettering. And the Environment Agency. A part-time senior project officer has been funded through grant funding stream for 3 years by the Joint Planning and Delivery Unit. The RNRP are currently talking with the National Lottery Heritage Fund to secure her position and also to appoint another part-time project officer so that we can continue to help to deliver the plan. In terms of our role, the council's role, the project forms part of the planning policy team's work programme, so resources have already been identified to support it. It may be that we, as a council, choose to make funding or matched funding available for project delivery, but again, we expect that that will be delivered through existing budgets. The next steps, hoping that members are in favour of endorsing this plan. It went to the Planning Policy Executive Advisory Panel on Monday, where it was received very well with a motion to take it forward to Executive in June. And I think finally it's to be recognised that by delivering the plan, we're not just looking at the natural environment, we're also going to have a positive impact, definitely in terms of climate change mitigation, but also in community cohesion and on potentially reducing crime and disorder. And I think that probably concludes the report from my perspective, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Brilliant, thank you, Emma. That was really useful to go through some of the key projects there. And it certainly is a very interesting and well thought out plan, in my opinion. We've got lots of hands gone up. Councillor Bone, your hand was up first.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm having difficulty, so I'm glad that my hand did go up. Just to say thank you, Emma. I'm glad that everybody is supportive. I'm sure, hopefully the rest of the committee will be, the panel will be. I think it's brilliant and it's very exciting, and thank you for your presentation. It was really positive. Thank you. Just a comment, so not a question.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bone. Councillor O'Hara, your hand was next.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I wholeheartedly supported the presentation at Planning Policy. Was fabulous, and the work that we've been doing in the background for the last few years hopefully has now come to fruition. I'm glad that we've got the support of a lot of partners, and wholeheartedly support it. I think in the world that we're now living in, it's imperative that we get the access and that we get people outside more. It helps with their mental well-being, and the prevention is better than cure. And I think, you know, what we're doing kind of rubber stamps what our ethos is. And thank you to all the officers, excuse me, and everybody who's been involved in this. And thank you to you, Harriet, for doing all the work that you have been doing and sorting out all the training to enlighten people who aren't perhaps on this involved in this meeting, and we'll see that how hard we are working to protect the world that we live in. So thank you for this presentation. It's fabulous, and I'd like to endorse it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Hara. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. On Monday, I've already expressed that planning policy that I really support this report. It's very interesting. And I did make the point about a lack of flood officers. It was discussed there, and I understand that plans are underway to recruit flood officers. I want to go to page 94 of the report. It's actually page 94 of our document, of our agenda, so page 73 of the report, with the water quality of the ice, because I am concerned that maybe the one bum note in the report, that the lower ice, that the water quality there is poor, and in terms of chemicals, it's even a fail. And then I look at the next page. It's very interesting. All this information shows the reasons why. I just wonder, are there any plans underway to treat this water quality? Because the Environment Agency has at times commented that it just doesn't have the financial resources to tackle pollution. But I see that there is continuous sewage discharge in the water. So I wonder, can something be done to stop that, or to treat the sewage before it reaches the water? That's just my question. Thank you.
Can I speak, Chair?
Yes, please.
That's a very technical question, Councillor Lee. There are projects within the plan that are focused on improving and enhancing the water quality, and obviously it's one of the key focuses for us. I was just trying to pull it up onto my other screen. I think the best thing I can do in order to find out exactly what the Environment Agency have got currently underway in terms of improving water quality is to contact them directly, and then to make to drop a message either to you directly or to the panel, just as information. Would that be helpful?
Yes, so it really is separate. The Environment Agency deals with that, and we as an authority have no control over that. Is that the situation? Is there no point that we try and improve the water quality? Is that completely separate, the authority, the responsibilities?
It's my understanding that it's a function of the Environment Agency specifically. Okay. And so, and I think without scrolling through all of the projects, I can't think specifically off the top of my mind exactly whether we've got anything to identify water quality, but I'm sure that we have. But I will pull those out of the report so that you can look at them individually, and then I'll also contact our partner, the Environment Agency, to ask just exactly what they've got planned at this moment in time with respect to water quality. I would think that there'll be, I know that there has been a skewing to some extent on the quality of the water. This is, I'm just dragging it out the back of my mind because we were talking about it a couple of years ago. The government changed the way that they measure water. They changed the indicators, and as a result of that, it kind of made us appear to be on the back foot, really, just simply because there's no way of measuring enhancements or improvements on the way forward, and it also depends on the level of the water at the time of year that testing was done. I'll also find out the information about that for you too, because I know that we have a briefing on it somewhere, and it might be useful for you to understand how the water quality is measured, and that although it looks quite harsh, is perhaps not as bad as the figures tend to indicate.
That's great, thank you. Thank you very much.
That's really useful, thank you. Councillor Dell, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Emma, I just want to say that this is a fantastic plan. Like there's been obviously been so much work put into this by so many different organisations and people, and yeah, it's really really good to read. I have written a page full of questions. However, from the sounds of it, it's you're probably not going to be able to get into like the detail. So I'll just sort of just ask the high level sort of questions if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Riverise linear park, then, and the way, the links. So is the objective there that they'll be able to walk the entire length of the Eyes from Corby to Wellingborough?
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And as I said earlier on in the presentation, it's not just about leisure and recreation. We really want to be able to encourage it as a commuter route as well. Not necessarily from Wellingborough to Corby every day, because that's a jolly long way, but around and about.
That's fantastic. So obviously there's like, I know Boughton House, for example, is one of the landowners that you have to go through. And so I presume you're talking to all of those.
Yes, absolutely. We've got a very good relationship with Boughton House. And that's what the feasibility study will do as well. It will start to look at exactly where that path can run, because although we've gone out and we've done the ground truthing and we've talked to a majority of the land is ours, but there are obviously landowners there. We've talked to the landowners to work out how we can work together to make that route happen. But the feasibility study will go into much more detail and enable us to properly identify that continuous route.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I did have a question about the same graphs that Councillor Lee mentioned, but you've covered that one already. I was looking through this and going, oh, where's all the funding coming from? So I'm really glad that at the bottom there's the big section of like potential sources of funding, and I'm really glad to hear that the project at Wickstead has got funded already, because I remember I sat through an Environment Agency presentation at the University of Northampton COP26 week where they talked about that. And it's really interesting to see what they're going to be doing there, and like how they're sort of correcting that watercourse which was straightened and turning it into more of a meadow.
It's a very exciting project. And actually the second part of that project, we are in discussion on Section 106 front, so we're hoping to be able to secure funding to deliver the habitat improvements and put the educational opportunities in there as well as improving connectivity and accessibility.
On the same presentation they talked about on Boughton Land, an old watermill area that they're trying to bring back to sort of mitigate flooding further downstream. Is that progressing as well, do you know?
I don't know about that.
That's right. I wanted to ask, will this plan, once adopted, inform planning policy? Because I know, for example, that Tailby Meadow Local Nature Reserve, which is just outside of Desborough, there's a Protect the Eyes Valley group, or if you're from Desborough, the Ice Valley. Then there's housing being built right next to the river. So I'm just wondering if in future, if there are sort of developments like that, will this plan be able to inform those, potentially inform those planning policy if those plan applications are going forward?
It's there are elements of the plan. I mean, this is partly why we want to take it to executive, so that we are able then to take it to our development management officers and say, look, this plan has been through executive, it's been endorsed and approved. And we would like you to use it as due consideration when you're determining planning applications. We would certainly, from a planning policy perspective, if applications come to us for specific planning policy advice, we would be taking it into account. So there's an awareness raising that needs to be done next in order to raise the profile of the plan. The Eyes Valley Way, that route, and the Greenway, we're currently in discussions about whether we can put a specific policy about that in the emerging strategic plan. We're also talking about the Eyes Valley Way and the Greenway informing a supplementary planning document. So yes, there are elements of the plan that will be taken forward specifically through planning policy, and then we'll use the plan to inform decision making as and where we can and it's appropriate.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That's really good news. I'm really intrigued by the habitat opportunity map for Northamptonshire.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you give us some more information on that and when that's coming forward?
Yeah, it is a very exciting project. It was done a couple of years ago. It's a geographical information system, so it's mapping basically. It was a huge piece of work. Again, a partnership project, but mainly pushed forward through the Joint Planning Unit. And what they've done is they've basically looked at habitat opportunities against constraints, and they've mapped the whole of Northamptonshire and all the way up to, in fact, they've mapped the whole of Northamptonshire all the way up to Peterborough, and Peterborough itself. And it looks at habitats, it looks at air quality. I'm not an expert on the habitat opportunity mapping. I'm more of a, right, there it is, right, how do we get the best line fit to make sure that our project, we're using it to inform our project, sort of picking, as it were, selection to and inform the project development to make sure that we're meeting the opportunities that are identified by the habitat opportunity mapping. What I could do, if the panel is particularly interested in it, I'm sure that my colleague who's done so much work behind it would be happy to come and talk to you and give you much more detail than I'm able to give.
I'll bid for that. Thank you. Just a couple more things. So the Eyes Valley Access Plan, I love the focus on active travel. On that section, there's quite a lot of talk about informal access. How does that informal access then become formalised? Is that through the actual, like, making the paths better paths, or
Yes, there would have to be identification of those paths. So what we will actually end up doing is, in the same way that the Greenway has been properly mapped, and there are interpretation boards along that route, and there is signage, we would have to work with highways as well in certain aspects and elements of it in order to have it recognised as forming the Eyes Valley Way. I think that's probably, we had a long discussion. I was at the Greenway board last week, and we had a long discussion about how we can enshrine the Greenway and the developing Eyes Valley Way actually into a permanent mapping tool, so that people can have an app on their phone, probably through the Northants app or something like that, so that it becomes more available and people can actually properly use it. Today, let's go for a 5k walk. Where can we do that? Just along, along this part here, or along that part there, or I just need to get to here. Can you give me directions? That's the aspiration. They're the aspirations, and they are probably some way in the future, because first of all, we've just got to get the route properly done and down on the ground, but definitely through signage, wayfinding and interpretation and mapping and permission on land.
Cool. Just one more. So the Hanwood, it mentioned somewhere on page 8 when Hanwood Park provides opportunity to increase ecosystems. I'm wondering, how is that through, like, Section 106 payments, or how does the Hanwood Park?
Yeah, it will be through the Section 106 payments, because they've got their formal and their informal open space. What we're looking to do is to connect through into Hanwood Park, so that we can then look at creating habitats that are appropriate within the open spaces that they have available.
Fantastic. And just finally, it's really good to see that there's other groups being linked into Natural Eyes. I know Martin, who runs Natural Eyes, and various eco groups and things. Yeah. I'd love to see if there was a plan to reintroduce the Greyling, which looks like it was gone extinct from Northamptonshire. Obviously, we've recently had the success of the checkered skipper reintroduction. We should, see if we can get the Greyling. And did we ever have beavers in Northamptonshire?
I kind of want to say yes, but I don't know. Does anybody know the answer to the question?
Don't worry. Thank you so much, Emma. It's lovely to see how much passion you have for this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dell. Councillor O'Hara, your hand's up, but is that wanting to come back in?
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Councillor. It was just really to say, and I don't know whether George can kind of answer this, but I know that well, first, one of the things that Desmond mentioned was Tailby Meadow. I know that other measures were included in the policy under DIRTS 5, so the land to the south of Desborough, all that is within part 2 of the local plan. So, and because it's been through planning policy and obviously through us, and then obviously then we'll go to the executive, I'm assuming that then it would, it can then be adopted. And I know that our officers, you know, and as other councillors will know, that we use planning policy all the time to make sure that we get the right developments in the right places. The other thing I wanted to comment on was that obviously there are a lot of people involved within the protection of the eyes and keeping it clean. And I know that there's a fair few farmers that obviously their land runs onto the eyes and therefore they have runoff from their crops, etc. And that is quite closely monitored by the Environment Agency. And I know they went through a couple of months ago and they had to recut some of it to take back some of the vegetation, but they're very restricted as to when they can do it and how much manpower they've got. Because obviously the fish that are in there and the seas, you know, with the season. So you know, I think that, you know, we will find that they are very much trying to make sure the water quality is fantastic. And I know as a paddleboarder, we go out and we quite often clean the river, and I always take a bag with me when I go paddleboarding and bring rubbish home with me. And it's about making people aware of the beauty that we've got along the Ise Valley and the, you know, and of our river, etc., and making sure they keep it clean by taking their litter home. And I think that's one thing that perhaps we need to promote more widely, that, you know, if we are going to open up access, that people need to be more aware. The reason a lot of the access points have closed is because during the pandemic, lots of people were out and about walking and they took barbecues and took picnics and left their rubbish behind. And, you know, I just think this is just a fantastic opportunity for people to get out and enjoy the open spaces that are all around us and protect our environment. So thank you for that. But, you know, I think the work that the Environment Agency is doing is pivotal to the partnership that we have with them. And also the comments that come in for planning are pivotal to protect the species that are around us as well. And I think George will probably be able to kind of enlighten us a little bit more with that and give us some comfort in what happens alongside planning and the decisions that are made by our officers, who are very capable and able to use that in advising potential developers how they can develop an area and so that it fits in with the community needs, desires and planning legislation, dare I say. But thank you for your time.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Hara. Councillor Allibone.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It is an excellent report. I agree with all our other speakers and colleagues. It's a very comprehensive report. In fact, it's a shame there isn't some sort of précis that would make it a little bit easier to get an overview of it, but there's a huge amount of detail on there. I just wanted to pick up on one or two comments that Councillor Lee made about pollution in waterways, and Councillor O'Hara has also touched on it. I think by and large, although we have got problems, our water quality is gradually improving. I think there are two main aspects of that. Obviously, sewage used to be pumped into waterways, excess sewage, and because a huge amount of it was pumped out to sea at one time. But of course, there are far more uses for it now, particularly in agriculture, where in the form of biosolids, they're put onto land, partly to reduce our dependence on inorganic fertilizers, and also to build our organic material up so we get much better water porosity and what have you. And the other aspect of it are chemicals, nitrates from fertilizers, and a chemical called metaldehyde, which are used in slug pellets. You can still buy them for gardens, but metaldehyde is now being phased out. I think this is the last year. It's being replaced by a ferric sulfate product. And they're used mainly to control slugs on oilseed rape crops. But certainly we're using buffers. I think most farmers actually now, on advice by DEFRA and working with an environment agency, as we do, as I do, we've all got 6 metre buffers around any water courses, so we don't actually plant up to that area. So when we're applying fertiliser or slug pellets or what have you, we're keeping well away from our water courses. So, all right, there's small aspects of it, but I think every little helps, as Tesco says. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allibone. That's another really useful insight there, which feeds into the questions we've had. I can't see any other hands up for that. I think that was another really useful discussion. My feeling is that everybody is quite overwhelmingly supportive of this. And to reiterate those thanks to all the officers that have been working hard on this, it really is great. So it will now go to the Executive Committee for discussion. I've made lots of notes as ever, which I will feed back in to the discussions that we have from this EAP. So that is really useful. Thank you. Thank you, Emma, for your input there. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So if we're all happy, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Community Asset Transfer Policy. I'm hoping I'm correct in thinking Jonathan's going to take us through that. So I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So this is the first of 2 policies on the agenda today, and this first one focuses on our council assets, and in particular our approach to community asset transfers of those assets. What the draft policy in front of you is proposing to do is it doesn't necessarily set out a list of properties to transfer, but more it sets out a framework for how we might consider applications in a transparent and consistent way, and also provide guidance to organisations about that process we'll follow and what they have to do as part of that application process. So what is a community asset transfer? It's principally where the council passes control of an asset to a community group or a town council or parish council with secured community benefits. So there has to be, important, those benefits to the community that result from that transfer. And typically this might include assets such as parks, community centres, allotments, heritage property, those sorts of assets in terms that would be considered. And why might we want to do this? Well, there are clear benefits to such transfers. Often communities are better placed to understand local service user needs. They can often provide services in an efficient way also. And ownership of or an interest in property can also support the financial sustainability of community groups. There's also benefits to the council. So clearly, if improved social outcomes are being delivered locally, that's a significant benefit. But there's also the benefit if we're able to reduce building management responsibility and indeed operating costs from our estate. But these sorts of transfers aren't necessarily without risks. There are risks associated to them, and it's important we're cognizant of those. So risks such as ensuring that those community outputs continue to be delivered post-transfer, and that there isn't a situation where we're disadvantaging individual parts of the community. That the group that we're transferring it to have got the appropriate capacity to manage the asset. So what would the financial liability be from that transfer? What experience have they got of managing assets? And there's also managing the risk of that loss of control of the asset and the local service delivery, and also the potential to create an ongoing financial liability or commitment to the council. So there's a lot to consider, and it's key that each application is considered on its own merits and that there's sufficient due diligence undertaken to consider all those risks and what suitable mitigation can be put in place to manage those. So what the policy sets out is a number of criteria that would be considered as part of an evaluation, and they're all detailed in Appendix D of the policy. So it's things sorts like the social benefits, economic, environmental benefits, governance arrangements, financial standing, and importantly, the fit to our corporate plan as a council, and appropriate consultation such as a ward councillor consultation as part of the application. So based on that evaluation process, we would put forward a recommendation either to proceed with the transfer or not, or to not to, and if we were to proceed, what sort of terms would be attached to a transfer. So again, that would range from a short-term license agreement with a continued council involvement, and that might be appropriate for a newer organisation, or we might consider a freehold transfer with appropriate restrictions, and typically we would only consider that in a situation where we were transferring to a town or a parish council. It's probably also worth noting that we still have a duty to obtain best value from any of these transfers. So that's a duty to obtain market value. Clearly, in these circumstances, the market value will be driven by the restrictions we might put on the property, so restricting it to a particular use. But there is potential, and that is detailed in the policy, in terms of consideration around undervalued transfers. So transfers at less than best value. But in those situations, we've got to ensure that there is a clear and sustained social, economic or environmental benefit attached to that transfer. And that's typically a process we'd follow with an independent valuation that would consider all those factors. There's more detail on the process for transfers in section 5 of the policy. The policy is going to be considered by the executive next, and if it's approved, we'd obviously look to promote the policy's use with community groups and other partners if it is subsequently approved. That's a summary of the paper and policies, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions on the policy.
Thank you, Jonathan. Do we have hands? We've got a hand gone up. So we've got Councillor Dale. Yours was up first.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you very much for bringing this to us. Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering, is this an update? Presumably this is an updated policy for NNC from the previous borough councils, because I remember reading about asset transfer before. I presume I'm on the Fletton Field Association newsletter for Oundle, and I know that they're looking to do a community asset transfer. Presumably this policy would need to be adopted, and that's where potentially the hold-up is for them. I know they've done a business plan and all that kind of stuff. I was also wondering if you could talk us through, because I presume these have happened in the past with the borough authorities. If you talk us through any examples that have happened in the past as well, if you've got any.
Sorry, if I could find my mute. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so through you, Chair, there were a variety of different policies that the previous councils had, some more detailed than others, and this is essentially looking to pull that framework together to make sure we're being consistent with these sorts of considerations. The Fletton Field interest, yeah, that will follow this process if approved by the executive, so it will provide that start of that consistent approach. In terms of other arrangements that have happened in the past, from what I'm aware of, clearly there have been situations where facilities like community centres have been devolved to local community groups, so not necessarily parish or town councils, but actually to community groups that operate those quite successfully. So that's an example where it could happen. But also, I suppose a lot of parish councils are already operating a number of services, such as local parks, play areas, things like that. So I think there's an opportunity around that going forward, and indeed town councils that you know may look as part of their strategy around what sorts of things they might like to take on and deliver locally, if they felt that they could do that and provide an improved outcome for the local residents. I think it's probably worthwhile just pausing on that in terms of a distinction between service transfer, and clearly a wholesale service transfer is slightly different to this, which is looking at more of an individual asset transfer. And in particular, service transfer would cover things like TUPE arrangements or implications and things like that, which is slightly different consideration. It would consider the same sorts of aspects that the policy in front of you would do, but it'd be slightly more detailed consideration to be made. But ultimately, they're the sorts of transfers that we'd be looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wondered, what would happen if there is a sports field, for example? I completely understand why a sports organization would want to take over a field. Maybe they would want to put a fence around it and to keep out dog walkers and litter and so on. What would happen then? I mean, would that be allowed? Because then that area would be, I can see both sides of it, that the area would stay cleaner, but on the other hand, it would no longer be accessible for the public, apart from the members of the sports club. And what happens if a piece of land is transferred like that, and then terms are breached? What happens then? Because it's possible that the sports club may have built a clubhouse, and they've invested a lot of money in it. So can you turn back an agreement like that? It's just, I wonder how you police this sort of thing. Although I am basically in favor of it, but I am concerned about giving an asset out of hands like that to organizations. Thank you.
But both really important points, because clearly there is an impact there. If we were to transfer a specific asset to a specific group and it was only used for their purposes, there could be a negative impact on the wider community from accessibility. And clearly open space that might be used by all of the community, we'd be looking to maintain that going forward, and we wouldn't necessarily be looking to restrict that access going forward. That's not what the policy's aims are. It's about actually improving the community access and use of those sorts of facilities. I think in terms of what would happen if the terms were breached, any transfer would have certain restrictions on use, and that would be a means of us actually enforcing that. So if it was a leasehold transfer, there would clearly be a route via the lease for us to enforce how a building was being used. So if something was transferred, it had to be used as a community centre, and all of a sudden a commercial operation started, there would be a clear route there for us to enforce that and take action to stop that. We'd also have to consider where there is a degree of service delivery for a transfer, we'd probably have to have a service level agreement, and that would typically be connected to the lease with suitable provisions in there that if there was a breach of the service level agreement, there would be a potential breach of the lease, and then there would be a route for us to enforce that. It's not necessarily something that we can immediately go in and start changing locks and taking back possession, but there is a route there for us to take action against the occupier if they are in breach of those terms. You can get slightly stricter terms where there is a potential clause in there that you can break the lease if there is a breach, but then that can often have a negative impact on a organisation's ability to obtain funding, because funders will look at the terms of their occupation, and if there is not a guaranteed length of lease period, they're not then able to obtain external funding easily. So there's a balance to be had with how much protection we put in place versus how much freedom we give the community organisation to access external funding and operate as they see fit in the most beneficial way to the community. So there's a balance to be had, and that's what we've endeavoured to articulate through the criteria we've set out in the policy.
Thank you. That was useful to go through that. I can't see any other hands up unless anybody wants to jump in at the last minute. So again, I've noted down the comments, which will be relayed when this is brought before the executive committee. So thank you to everyone for your input on that. So the next item is a similar area. It is the asset of community value policy. And again, I think I'll probably hand back to Jonathan to take us through this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's nearly the same words, but in a slightly different order, but they do mean different things. So the policy covering the community right to bid, so the asset of community value policy, we have a responsibility under the Localism Act for determining asset of community value applications. And it's different from the last policy that we've just considered, in that such applications generally apply to any land or building in North Northants that's nominated by an eligible group. So with a few exceptions, such as residential property, it could be private land, private buildings, or council land and buildings. So the main purpose of the legislation is to provide protection to community facilities from being redeveloped for alternative uses. So these things such as village pubs, community buildings, open space. And there's a process that's set out in the legislation for how you go about listing an asset of community value. The legislation is quite prescriptive of that process in terms of who can nominate an asset and the criteria to be considered for a building or land to be an asset of community value. And we've set that out in Appendix E in terms of the evaluation form for the sorts of considerations that the council needs to make. So are they a qualifying nominator? Does the main use of the asset further social well-being and community interests? And we've also included provision in there for ward councillor, parish council and the asset owner consultation in terms of views about how we form that view of whether an asset is an asset of community value. It's probably worth noting that there must be clear evidence to satisfy the definition. It's not a case of that we'd like it to be a community asset, it either is or it isn't. And the burden is on the nominator to provide the evidence to substantiate the application. But the policy has been developed with that in mind in terms of supporting groups on what sort of things they'd need to put forward and what sort of evidence we'd be looking for. So evidence of use, numbers of people using them, how often they used, when they were last used, those sorts of type of things that we'd expect to see in an application. By approving the listing of an asset, so if we as a council agree that an asset should be listed, there's an obligation then placed on the owner of the asset to notify the council if it decides to sell the asset within a 5-year period. So if a owner decides to sell, it triggers, they have to tell the council, and then that triggers an initial 6-week moratorium on sale. So they can't sell in those initial 6 weeks. And during that time, the council would publicise the approach or the notice that that asset is going to be sold or proposed to be sold. And during that which time, community groups can come forward and put an expression of interest in to buy that property. And then if we do receive that expression of interest, a further 6-month moratorium period is triggered. And during that time, the owner of the asset can't sell the property. And that 6-month period is to give the community groups an opportunity to work up plans to put a bid in for the property. It's probably worth noting at this point that the council's role in that process is purely to administer the moratorium process rather than to be involved in the bid development or the sale process or the terms that might be agreed. And the legislation places no obligation on the owner to engage with the community group or indeed to give any preferential treatment to the group's bid. So it is a right to bid rather than a right to buy in that respect. And then at the end of the 6-month period or the 6-month moratorium, the owner can dispose of the property as they see fit. They don't necessarily have to accept or consider the community group's bid. In terms of other obligations, we're required to keep a record of any decisions we may make on applications. That's whether we agree to list them or not to list them. So over the last year, we've been working to the different policy arrangements that there were across the different councils. So we're looking at collating all those lists into one master copy that we'll have on the internet for people to look at and consider. And we've also provided in the policy an appeal process and compensation process, which the owners of assets of community value are entitled to progress. And again, that process will follow the legislation that sets out that process. So that's a quick run through of the policy, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions that the panel have.
Thank you. Councillor O'Hara.
Hi, thank you, Chair. It was just to say that I give a thank you really for the clarity of the policy. I think it's something that's been required, and I think there's so much misunderstanding around this. So bring this policy forward and being able to hopefully adopt it is a fantastic step forward in providing some comfort and providing information really for people, because we've had quite a debate over it in the previous few months and years over various assets. There's a misconception there that they're obligated to actually sell it just because you put a bid in. and that it's a right, and this policy is fabulous in clarifying how it's done and how the process works. So I just want to say thank you to officers for that, and I don't particularly have any concerns with it, and I hope that we can take it forward and provide a service for the people living in Northamptonshire. So thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor O'Hara. Councillor Dell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, similar questions to last time, really. I mean, I know that because I've looked into community of asset value, assets of community value, because I know that the bingo hall in the old bingo hall in Kettering, it was a big news story when that was listed. So it's good that they're being putting them all together. I'm just wondering, I know there's plenty of listings of them, but do you know of any examples where there have actually been successful bids by the community groups or the organisations in North Northants? That was my question, really.
Through you, Chair, I'm not aware of any recently, as in the last year. Before that, I was aware of one, but I don't believe there was an eventual bid in the end. So there was a moratorium period, but I don't believe there was an eventual bid in the end. But other than that, I've not come across any.
That's brilliant, thank you. But yeah, supportive of this, absolutely. It's good to have it written. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Hara, you can see your hands up. Would you like to come back in? That's fine.
No, sorry.
Not a problem. Brilliant. So I can't see any other hands up. Again, thank you, Jonathan, for taking us through those. It's useful to have the further detail, and I'm sure that other members will have been consulted on assets of community value where they occur in their divisions. So we will go to the last item, which is item 7, close of the meeting. The next meeting date is being finalised, but I understand it will be in early July. This is due to the date of the annual meeting and making sure that committees are placed around this. So that will be advised over the coming days, I would suspect. And again, thank you to members for all your input, really useful, and to officers for coming along and talking us through those bits. It's been a really interesting meeting. So I hope everybody has a good rest of their day.